Thomas Mitchell straightened his tie as the chauffeur pulled up to Elysium, Boston's most exclusive restaurant. The reservation had been made weeks in advance, a celebration planned down to the last detail. As CEO of Mitchell Innovations, Thomas had just closed a $380 million merger with Apex Technologies, a deal that would transform his company from a respected regional player into a national powerhouse. The restaurant's grand entrance was lined with marble columns, and waiters in pristine white jackets nodded respectfully as he entered. His team had already arrived, along with board members and key investors. A spontaneous round of applause erupted when they spotted him. "There he is, the man of the hour," called out James Whitfield, his chief financial officer and oldest friend. "We were starting to think you got cold feet about spending some of that new fortune on dinner." Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Something about tonight, perhaps the milestone itself, was making his chest tight. Success had been his shield, his way of proving that he'd risen above his beginnings. Yet the higher he climbed, the more the past seemed to chase him. Caroline Rhodes, his fiancée of 8 months, appeared at his side in an elegant black dress. She squeezed his arm gently. "You're miles away," she whispered. "Everything all right? Just taking it all in," he lied, patting her hand. The truth was more complicated. 20 years ago, he'd been Thomas Mitchell of Oakwood Orphanage, a scrappy, determined teenager with a little sister who depended on him. Maya had been only 7 when their mother died. Their father had disappeared years earlier, leaving nothing but unpaid bills and unanswered questions. Thomas led Caroline to the long table where crystal glasses caught the light from chandeliers overhead. He made the appropriate toasts, shook the right hands, and laughed at inside jokes about the negotiation process. But every time the restaurant doors opened, he flinched slightly. "To new beginnings," announced Caroline, raising her glass. The others joined, their faces flushed with champagne and victory. New beginnings. If only they knew how many times he'd tried to start over. First, the scholarship to Massachusetts State. Then the entry-level job at a tech startup. Each promotion, each achievement had been another brick in the wall between him and the memories. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Thomas silenced it without looking. "You deserve this," Caroline whispered, leaning close. "Let the past go." He nearly choked on his champagne. Had he spoken about the orphanage in his sleep? About the promise he made to Maya that they would never be separated? About the day he left for college, promising to return for her as soon as he could? He never did. The shame of that failure had become the engine of his ambition. The sommelier was describing a rare vintage when it happened. The heavy oak doors burst open with a bang that silenced every conversation. Standing in the doorway was a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, wearing torn jeans and a stained hoodie. Her dark hair was matted, her face smudged with what might have been dirt or bruises. Security guards moved immediately, but froze when she screamed words that sent ice through Thomas's veins. "Run! They're going to get you!" The restaurant fell silent. Every head turned toward the commotion, but Thomas couldn't move. There was something in her voice, a cadence, an echo from long ago. The room seemed to tilt beneath him. "Ma'am, you need to leave," a security guard said firmly, taking her arm. "No, wait," Thomas said, standing so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Let her speak." Caroline tugged at his sleeve. "Thomas, what are you doing?" She's clearly disturbed. But Thomas was already moving toward the girl, who was breathing heavily, looking over her shoulder as if being pursued. When she turned back and her eyes met his, the world around them disappeared. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. They were the same deep brown as his own. The same eyes that had looked up at him trustingly when he tucked her into bed at the orphanage. The same eyes that had been filled with tears the day he left, promising to come back. Thomas stopped a few feet away from her, his heart hammering. "Maya," he whispered, though he already knew. The young woman's wild expression softened for just a moment with recognition. "It's me, Maya," she confirmed, her voice breaking. And in that moment, Thomas Mitchell, CEO, millionaire, self-made success story, felt his carefully constructed life begin to crumble around him. The restaurant's ambient noise faded to a distant hum. Waiters froze mid-stride, champagne flutes suspended in their hands. The clinking of silverware ceased. Every conversation halted as all eyes turned toward the disheveled young woman and the man who had risen to meet her. "Sir, do you know this person?" asked the maitre d', his professional composure barely masking his disdain. Thomas couldn't answer. His throat had closed up. 20 years of carefully constructed defenses were collapsing in an instant. Maya stood before him. Not the 7-year-old with pigtails and missing front teeth he'd left behind, but a grown woman with haunted eyes and trembling hands. Caroline appeared at his side, her face a mixture of concern and confusion. "Thomas? What's happening?" "She's my sister," he managed to say, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. How long had it been since he'd acknowledged her existence aloud? Maya's eyes darted nervously around the room. "We need to talk somewhere private." "Now." The restaurant manager stepped forward. "Mr. Mitchell, would you like to use our private dining room?" Thomas nodded, still unable to take his eyes off Maya. She looked malnourished, her cheekbones too sharp, dark circles beneath her eyes. Her clothes were worn and dirty, her sneakers held together with duct tape. What had happened to her? What kind of life had she lived while he was attending galas and closing million-dollar deals? "This way, please," the manager said, leading them down a hallway lined with black and white photographs of Boston's historic landmarks. Caroline squeezed Thomas's arm. "Should I come with you?" "No," he replied, perhaps too quickly. I need to speak with her alone. Please make my excuses to everyone." Caroline's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together. "Thomas, who is she? You've never mentioned a sister." The accusation in her voice stung, but he had no defense. "I'll explain everything later. I promise." The private dining room was intimate, with a single table set for 6 and walls paneled in dark wood. The manager discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind him. Maya immediately moved to the farthest corner, her back to the wall, as if preparing for an attack. "Are you alone?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the door. "Yes." "Maya, what's going on? Where have you been all these years?" "I tried to find you after—" "Don't," she cut him off, her voice sharp. "Don't pretend you looked for me." The blunt force of her words made him step back. "I did. After I graduated, I went back to Oakwood, but they said you'd been placed with a family in Chicago." "Lies," Maya spat. "I was never adopted. I aged out of the system at 18, bouncing between 6 different foster homes before that. None of them stuck." Her bitter laugh echoed in the small room. "Turns out I wasn't as adoptable as my big brother." Each word landed like a physical blow. Thomas sank into a chair, memories flooding back. The day he'd left for college on his full scholarship, Maya clinging to his legs, begging him not to go. His promise that he'd visit every weekend. His promise that as soon as he had an apartment, she could live with him. Promises he'd broken. At first, there had been weekly phone calls, then monthly, then holiday cards, then nothing. He'd told himself she was better off, that she'd found a new family, that his presence would only confuse her. The reality now stood before him, a living indictment of his abandonment. "Maya, I'm so sorry," he began, but she cut him off again. "I didn't track you down for apologies," she said, her voice steadier now. "I came to warn you. You're in danger." Thomas frowned. "Danger? What are you talking about?" "Your new business partner," Maya said, moving closer and lowering her voice. "Richard Lang. He's not who you think he is." "How do you know about Richard?" "Your face has been all over the business news for weeks. Self-made tech genius partners with investment mogul. I recognized you immediately." Her expression softened momentarily. "You look like Dad now." The mention of their father, a shadow figure in Thomas's memory, caught him off guard. "Maya, you're not making sense. Why would I be in danger?" She glanced nervously at the door again, then pulled a worn photograph from her pocket and slid it across the table. It showed a younger version of their father standing next to another man at what appeared to be a company event. The other man was unmistakably Richard Lang. "Dad didn't abandon us," Maya said quietly. "He was killed. And the man responsible is the same man whose hand you shook today." Thomas stared at the photograph, his mind racing. Their father had worked at First Boston Trust, a bank that had collapsed amid fraud allegations when Thomas was 12. He remembered the police coming to their apartment, his mother crying, the whispers about suicide. But there had never been a body found. "That's not possible," Thomas said, pushing the photo away. "Dad disappeared," Mom said. "Mom believed what they wanted her to believe," Maya insisted. "But Dad left evidence. Records of the money laundering operation he discovered at the bank. Richard Lang was behind it all. And you expect me to believe that after 20 years, Richard tracked me down to what? Finish the job. Maya's eyes flashed with anger. No, I think it's a sick coincidence. I don't think he knows who you are, who we are. But once he figures it out. She left the sentence unfinished. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. Could any of this be true? Or was his sister suffering from delusions? How did you find this out? He asked carefully. I've been looking for answers since I was 16, Maya replied. Dad had a safety deposit box. It took me years to track it down and gain access. Inside was everything: bank records, correspondence, recordings. He was building a case against Lang and his partners. Her voice broke. He was killed the day before he planned to go to the FBI. Thomas wanted to dismiss it all as fantasy, but something in Maya's eyes, a clarity despite her disheveled appearance, made him pause. And there was the photograph. Their father and Richard Lang, standing side by side. If what you're saying is true, Thomas said slowly, then by signing this deal, I've just gone into business with our father's murderer. Maya nodded, tears welling in her eyes. And when he realizes who you are, your life won't be worth a damn. Thomas's mind raced as he tried to process Maya's bombshell revelation. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the water glass on the table, needing something to ground him in reality. I need to see everything, he said finally. All the evidence you have. Maya hesitated, studying his face. You believe me? I don't know what to believe, Thomas admitted. But I know you didn't track me down after all these years just to lie to me. She nodded slowly and pulled a small, battered flash drive from her pocket. It's all here. Bank transfers, voice recordings, emails, everything Dad collected before they killed him. Thomas stared at the tiny device that supposedly contained the truth about their father's fate. How did you even get access to his safety deposit box? You would have needed his key and ID. Maya finished for him. Mom kept the key without knowing what it was for. I found it after she died, among her things at the care facility. As for ID, she shrugged. I've picked up some skills over the years. Not all of them legal. The implication hung in the air. While Thomas had been climbing corporate ladders, Maya had been surviving on society's margins. Let's see what's on it, Thomas said, pulling out his phone. Maya snatched the flash drive back. Not here. Not on any device connected to your company's network. Lang has people everywhere. Tech people. Thomas wanted to argue, but stopped himself. If even a fraction of what Maya was saying proved true, caution was warranted. Where then? I have a laptop. A clean one. It's in my backpack at the motel where I'm staying. Thomas checked his watch. Nearly 10 p.m. His engagement party guests would be wondering where he'd disappeared to. Caroline would be worried, maybe angry. None of that seemed to matter anymore. Let's go, he said, standing. Maya's eyes widened. Now? What about your fancy dinner? It can wait. They slipped out through the kitchen, avoiding the main dining room. Thomas texted Caroline that a family emergency had come up and he'd explain later. It wasn't a lie, he reasoned, though it felt like one. Outside, the cool October air hit them. Thomas started toward the valet stand, but Maya grabbed his arm. Not your car, she said urgently. It could be tracked. Thomas almost laughed at the paranoia, but something in her expression stopped him. Fine, we'll take a taxi. The ride to Maya's motel in Somerville was silent. Thomas stared out the window, at the passing city lights, trying to reconcile the successful life he'd built with the dark conspiracy Maya was describing. Occasionally, he glanced at his sister, really looking at her. Despite the dirt and dishevelment, she had their mother's high cheekbones and their father's determined chin. She was family, undeniably. The motel was the kind Thomas hadn't seen since his early college days, a rundown establishment with flickering neon and rooms accessible from an exterior walkway. Maya led him to room 118, checking over her shoulder before unlocking the door. Inside, the small room was neat despite its shabbiness. A backpack sat on the bed, along with a few items of clothing folded in a tidy pile. On the small desk was an older model laptop. Home sweet home, Maya said with a hint of defensiveness. How long have you been staying here? 3 weeks. Ever since I tracked you to Boston. She unzipped her backpack and pulled out a notebook filled with newspaper clippings and handwritten notes. I've been following your career for years, from a distance. Watching you rise. The implied accusation was clear. You thrived while I struggled. Thomas had no defense. Maya powered up the laptop and inserted the flash drive. Sit, she said, gesturing to the chair. You should see this from the beginning. The first file was a scanned letter dated August 15, 2003, 2 weeks before their father disappeared. It was addressed to the FBI field office in Boston, outlining suspicious transactions at First Boston Trust involving offshore accounts linked to Richard Lang's investment firm. Dad was a forensic accountant, Meyer explained. He was assigned to audit these transactions and found irregularities. Massive ones. Thomas remembered his father working late nights, looking tired and worried. At the time, he'd been too absorbed in high school and college applications to pay much attention. The next file was a spreadsheet detailing wire transfers totaling over $50 million to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Following that were recorded phone conversations, their father's voice bringing a lump to Thomas's throat, discussing the findings with his supervisor, who sounded increasingly nervous. They were laundering money for the Donovan crime family, Maya said quietly. Richard Lang's investment firm was the conduit. Thomas shook his head in disbelief. Richard Lang is one of the most respected financial figures in the country. He sits on charity boards. He has a wing named after him at Boston General. Perfect cover, isn't it? Maya's voice was bitter. And this is the smoking gun. She opened the final file, a video recording from what appeared to be a hidden camera. The footage showed their father meeting with Richard Lang and another man in an upscale restaurant. The audio was muffled but clear enough. I know about the Donovan accounts, their father said. I have copies of everything. Lang's face remained impassive. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone, Mitchell. I'm not interested in arrangements. This stops now, or I take everything to the FBI. The third man leaned forward. Think of your children, Mitchell. The boy with the scholarship to MSU. The little girl. Would be a shame if something happened. Their father's face went pale. Are you threatening my family? Just offering perspective, Lang said smoothly. Life can be unpredictable. Accidents happen. The video ended abruptly. Thomas sat back, stunned. That was 3 days before he disappeared. Maya nodded. The official story was that he embezzled money and ran. But they killed him, Thomas. And they threatened us too. Her voice broke. Mom never knew. She died believing he'd abandoned us. Thomas thought of the merger documents he'd signed that morning, binding his company's future to Lang's. The celebratory dinner. The handshakes and congratulations. He'd unwittingly walked right into the lion's den. We need to go to the FBI, he said, standing up. With what? Evidence from 20 years ago? A video with a vague threat? They'll laugh us out of the building. Maya paced the small room. Lang has friends in high places now. Government connections. This needs to be handled carefully. Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. Where are you? Everyone's worried. Call me. He put the phone away, his priorities shifting by the second. Then what do you suggest? Maya's expression hardened with determination. We need more recent evidence. Something that proves Lang is still dirty. And I think I know where to find it. Where? Your company, she said simply. Why do you think Lang was so eager to merge with Mitchell Innovations? Your security encryption technology is the perfect tool for hiding digital financial tracks. The realization hit Thomas like a physical blow. His life's work, the security systems he designed to protect people's data, was about to become a weapon in the hands of the man who had destroyed their family. I've been such a fool, he whispered. Maya put a hand on his shoulder, the first gentle touch between them in 20 years. You didn't know, but now you do. And we can stop him, together. Thomas looked up at his sister, seeing not the angry, disheveled woman who had burst into his celebration, but the ally he needed. The family he had abandoned was now his only hope. Together, he agreed, taking her hand. But first, I need to make a call. Dawn broke over Boston as Thomas and Maya finalized their plan. They'd spent the night poring over their father's evidence, connecting dots across 2 decades. Thomas had called Caroline only once, giving a vague explanation about a family emergency. Her voice had been tight with confusion and hurt, but he couldn't risk telling her more. Are you sure about this? Maya asked, sipping coffee from a paper cup. Her hair was now pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore clothes Thomas had bought from an all-night store, simple jeans and a black sweater that made her look like any other young professional in the city. No, Thomas admitted, but it's our best shot. Their plan was risky. Thomas would attend the scheduled integration meeting at Lang Investments while wearing a recording device. Maya would wait nearby with a private investigator Thomas had once hired for corporate security, a former FBI agent named Decker who owed him a favor and didn't ask too many questions. Thomas's phone buzzed with texts from his executive team. The merger news had broken in the morning financial papers. Mitchell Innovation stock was up 12% in pre-market trading. Everyone was celebrating what looked like a brilliant business move. If only they knew. Thomas adjusted his tie in the mirror of Maya's motel room. I still think you should wait. Somewhere safer. Maya shook her head firmly. We do this together or not at all. The stubborn set of her jaw reminded him so much of their mother that it made his chest ache. He'd missed so much of her life. Her first day of high school, graduation, every birthday. Yet here she was, risking everything to save him. Lang won't recognize you, Thomas said. You were just a kid when Dad disappeared. I'm counting on that, Maya replied, tucking the flash drive into her pocket. Remember, get him talking about the security protocols. That's where he'll slip up. They took separate taxis downtown. The Lang Investments building dominated the financial district, 60 floors of glass and steel topped with a distinctive spire. Thomas passed through security with his newly issued executive badge, nodding to the guards who had no idea he was now their enemy. In the elevator, Thomas checked the recording device, a modified smartwatch Decker had provided. His heart pounded as the numbers climbed. 45, 46, 47. The doors opened directly into a reception area where Caroline waited, her face a careful mask of professional composure. She was Lang's head of public relations. It was how they'd met a year earlier. Now Thomas wondered if that had been orchestrated too. The meeting's about to start, she said coolly. Everyone's waiting. Caroline, I'm sorry about last night. I can explain everything soon, I promise. She studied his face. Your sister? The one you never once mentioned in all our time together. Thomas winced. It's complicated. Clearly. Her voice softened slightly. Is she okay? She will be. Thomas took a deep breath. We both will. The boardroom doors were open. Around the massive table sat the key players from both companies. Thomas's executive team looking excited if a bit confused by his disappearance the night before, and Lang's people, sleek and confident. At the head of the table sat Richard Lang himself. At 68, Lang was still an imposing figure, tall and fit with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He rose as Thomas entered, extending his hand with a practiced smile. The man of the hour, Lang said, his grip firm. We missed you at the end of dinner last night. Thomas forced himself to shake the hand of the man who had likely ordered his father's murder. Family emergency. All sorted now. Lang's smile didn't reach his eyes. Family must always come first. Please sit. We were just discussing integration timelines. Thomas took his seat, activating the recording device with a subtle tap. For the next hour, he played his part, discussing technical specifications, staffing changes, marketing strategies. All the while, he steered the conversation toward what he needed. The real value proposition is in our encryption algorithms, Thomas said, particularly for high-frequency financial transactions. Lang nodded appreciatively. That's precisely what attracted us to Mitchell Innovations. In today's regulatory environment, secure channels for international fund transfers are invaluable. Especially for certain clients, I imagine. Thomas pressed, watching Lang's face carefully. A flicker of something, suspicion, perhaps, crossed Lang's features. All our clients value privacy, Mitchell. Thomas leaned forward. I've been wondering about your interest in our Asian server architecture. It's an unusual focus for a company with your primarily Western client base. The room grew quiet. Lang's chief technology officer started to speak, but Lang silenced him with a gesture. You've done your homework, Lang said, his voice cooler now. Let's just say we have expansion plans that your technology makes possible. In regions with less rigorous banking oversight, Thomas suggested. Lang's smile tightened. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, after the meeting. I think now is perfect. Thomas glanced at his watch, knowing Maya and Decker would be moving into position. In fact, I've been meaning to ask you about First Boston Trust. The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Lang's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his pen. An unfortunate business failure from many years ago, Lang said smoothly. Before my time, really. Why do you ask? My father worked there, Thomas said, his heart racing. Robert Mitchell, forensic accountant. The color drained from Lang's face so subtly that only someone watching for it would notice. His recovery was swift. Mitchell. Can't say I recall the name. Thomas pulled out his phone and placed it on the table, displaying the photograph Maya had shown him. Lang and his father, standing side by side at a company event. Are you sure? You seemed well acquainted. Lang stared at the photo, then at Thomas. The boardroom had gone completely silent. Thomas's team looked confused. Lang's people seemed frozen. Where did you get that? Lang asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The same place I got the recordings of you threatening my father 3 days before he disappeared. Thomas stood slowly. The same place I got the banking records showing your connections to the Donovan family and their money laundering operation. The operation my father was about to expose before you had him killed. Chaos erupted. Lang's lawyers jumped to their feet, shouting about slander and legal action. Thomas's executives stared in shock. Caroline covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Lang remained seated, his face a mask of control. Those are serious accusations, Mr. Mitchell. Completely unfounded, of course. Are they? Thomas challenged. Because right now, the FBI is receiving copies of everything my father collected. Everything you thought died with him. It was a bluff. Decker was ex-FBI, not current, and they hadn't had time to involve official channels. But Lang didn't know that. Lang stood, buttoning his suit jacket calmly. I think this meeting is over. My lawyers will be in touch regarding your mental health episode. They're not the only ones who will be in touch, Thomas replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Check your email, Richard. I've just sent you a preview of what the authorities are receiving. You might want to see it before they arrive. Lang's face betrayed nothing as he pulled out his phone. Thomas had indeed sent an email, containing just one of the incriminating files from the flash drive. Just enough to prove he wasn't bluffing. Lang's composure cracked as he stared at his screen. His hand trembled slightly before he pocketed the device. Everyone out, Lang ordered. Now, except you, Mitchell. The room emptied quickly, people sensing the dangerous undercurrent. Caroline hesitated at the door, her expression torn between concern and betrayal. Thomas nodded slightly, telling her silently that he would be okay. Whether she believed him, he couldn't tell. When the door closed, Lang moved with surprising speed for a man his age. He was around the table in seconds, his face contorted with rage. You have no idea what you're doing, he hissed. No idea who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Thomas replied, standing his ground. The question is, do you? The boardroom doors burst open. Maya stood there, flanked by Decker and 2 uniformed police officers. Richard Lang, said one officer, stepping forward. We'd like you to come with us for questioning. Lang's eyes darted between Thomas and Maya, realization dawning. Mitchell had 2 children, he said quietly. A boy and a girl. Maya stepped into the room, her face calm despite the tremor in her hands. Hello, Mr. Lang. Remember me? The little girl you threatened 20 years ago? I've been looking forward to this moment for a very long time. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and media scrutiny. The Mitchell siblings' accusations against Richard Lang triggered an investigation that rapidly expanded beyond Boston to financial centers worldwide. What began as a cold case into Robert Mitchell's disappearance evolved into one of the largest financial crime investigations of the decade. Thomas sat in his office at Mitchell Innovations, staring at the headlines scrolling across his tablet. Lang empire crumbling as charges mount. 20-year-old murder case reopened. Tech CEO's reunion with long-lost sister exposes massive financial conspiracy. The merger was dead, of course. Mitchell Innovation stock had taken a beating initially, but had stabilized as the market realized the company itself wasn't implicated in Lang's crimes. Thomas's board had reluctantly backed him after their initial shock, though several members had resigned in protest over his reckless actions. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Maya stood in the doorway, looking almost unrecognizable from the desperate woman who had burst into Elysium restaurant. Her hair was cut in a simple bob, and she wore a borrowed pantsuit that was slightly too large for her thin frame. The prosecutor wants to meet again tomorrow, she said, entering and sitting across from him. They found another offshore account linked to Lang. Thomas nodded. I'll be there. An awkward silence fell between them. The same awkwardness that had characterized their interactions since the confrontation with Lang. They were allies united by a common enemy and shared trauma, but strangers in almost every other way. Have you spoken to Caroline? Maya asked finally. Thomas winced. His engagement, had become another casualty of recent events. Caroline had moved out of their shared apartment 3 days after Lang's arrest, leaving her ring on the kitchen counter. "She's cooperating with the investigation," he said neutrally. "She claims she never knew anything about Lang's criminal activities." "Do you believe her?" Thomas rubbed his eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore. She worked closely with Lang for years. But then again, so did hundreds of others. Maya studied him. You loved her." "I thought I did." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Now I wonder if I just love the idea of her, of having a perfect life with a perfect partner to prove how far I'd come." "From the orphanage," Maya said quietly. The word hung between them, heavy with shared history and divergent paths. "I should have come back for you," Thomas said, finally voicing the guilt that had haunted him for 20 years. "I promised I would." Maya's expression softened. "I used to hate you for that. For years, I fantasized about finding you successful and happy, and destroying your life the way I thought you destroyed mine." She gave a small, sad smile. "But then I found Dad's evidence, and suddenly there was something more important than my anger." "Justice," Thomas supplied. "Truth," Maya corrected. "I needed to know what really happened to our family, why it fell apart." Thomas stood and walked to the window overlooking Boston Harbor. The afternoon sun glinted off the water, boats moving silently in the distance. "What happens now?" he asked, not turning around. "After the trial, after Lang goes to prison. What then?" The question wasn't just about Lang. It was about them. The Mitchell siblings, reunited by trauma but divided by 2 decades of separate lives. "I don't know," Maya admitted. "I've been focused on finding Dad's killer for so long. I never really thought about what comes after." Thomas turned to face her. "Where have you been living all these years?" Maya shrugged. "Everywhere. Nowhere. Foster homes until I was 18. Then shelters, cheap apartments, friends' couches when I had friends. I got my GED, took some community college classes when I could afford it." The matter-of-fact way she described her hardship made Thomas's chest tighten with guilt. While he'd been attending MIT, building his company, buying his waterfront condo, his sister had been struggling just to survive. "Come stay with me," he said suddenly. "I have plenty of room." Maya looked surprised, then wary. "I don't need charity, Thomas." "It's not charity. It's—" He struggled to find the right words. "It's a start. A chance to know each other again." She didn't answer immediately, and Thomas didn't push. They had both learned patience in different ways, he in corporate boardrooms, she in the harsh realities of life on society's margins. "I'll think about it," she said finally. The following Sunday, Thomas found himself doing something he hadn't done in years: cooking. His spacious kitchen had always been more for show than use, as he typically ate at restaurants or ordered in. But today he was attempting their mother's lasagna recipe from memory. The doorbell rang just as he was layering noodles. Maya stood outside, a small duffel bag in hand. "I decided to take you up on your offer," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Just until I figure out my next steps." Thomas stepped aside to let her in, trying not to show how relieved he felt. "I'm making Mom's lasagna. We're trying to." A ghost of a smile crossed Maya's face. "You're putting in too much oregano." She always said American recipes used too much. Thomas led her through his penthouse apartment, suddenly seeing it through her eyes. The expensive, minimalist furniture, the abstract art he'd bought, because his interior designer said it was important, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their panoramic view of the city. "The guest room is through here," he said, opening a door to a space that had rarely been used. "Bathrooms attached. There's a closet and dresser for your things." Maya placed her duffel bag on the bed, looking around with an unreadable expression. "This is bigger than our entire apartment was growing up." Thomas didn't know how to respond to that. Another uncomfortable silence stretched between them. "I should check on the lasagna," he said finally. In the kitchen, he found the sauce beginning to burn. As he stirred it frantically, Maya appeared at his elbow. "Here," she said, taking the spoon. "Let me." They worked side by side, Maya correcting his technique, Thomas following her lead. It was the first time they'd done anything together that wasn't related to Lang or the investigation. As they sat down to eat, Thomas realized he'd forgotten to buy wine. He started to apologize, but Maya shook her head. "I don't drink," she said simply. 5 years sober next month. Another piece of her life Thomas knew nothing about. Another reminder of how far apart they'd grown. "That's impressive," he said sincerely. "It must have been hard." Hardest thing I've ever done, she admitted, taking a bite of lasagna. Well, second hardest. Finding you was the first. Thomas set down his fork. Why did you find me? I mean, you could have taken Dad's evidence directly to the authorities. Maya considered the question. I thought about it, but they might not have believed me. A homeless woman with a 20-year-old grudge. I needed someone Lang would have to take seriously. She paused. And maybe I needed to see you. To know if my big brother was still in there somewhere. And is he? Maya studied him, her eyes, so like his own, searching his face. I'm still deciding. Later that night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He wandered into his living room to find Maya sitting by the window, looking out at the city lights. I used to look up at buildings like this, she said without turning around. I'd see the lights on and wonder what it was like inside. If the people were happy. If they knew how lucky they were. Thomas sat across from her. Were we ever happy? Before everything fell apart, Maya's expression softened in the dim light. Don't you remember the Saturdays Dad would take us to that old movie theater? The one with the sticky floors and the popcorn machine that always broke down. Thomas smiled at the memory. He'd let us get candy and popcorn, even though Mom said it would ruin our dinner. And we'd sit in the back row, Maya continued. And he'd do those ridiculous whispered commentaries that made us laugh so hard people would shush us. They sat in silence for a moment, the shared memory hanging between them like a fragile bridge across the years. We were happy then, Maya said quietly. Before the bank, before Lang, before everything. We were just a normal family. Thomas felt tears prick at his eyes, the first he'd allowed himself since this all began. I'm sorry, Maya. For all of it. She reached across the space between them and took his hand. It was the first time they had touched by choice, not necessity. I know, she said simply. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. 1 year later, Thomas stood at the back of a small auditorium at Roxbury Community College, watching his sister address a room full of attentive faces. Maya had become a regular speaker at foster care advocacy events, sharing her story with social workers, potential foster parents, and teenagers navigating the system. The statistics tell you that kids who age out of foster care are likely to end up homeless, addicted, or incarcerated, Maya was saying, her voice steady and clear. I was one of those statistics for a while. But what the numbers don't show is our resilience, our capacity to survive, and, with the right support, our ability to thrive. Thomas felt a swell of pride as he watched her. In the years since Lang's arrest, Maya had transformed, not just in appearance, but in purpose. She'd moved into her own apartment after 3 months with Thomas, insisting on independence while accepting his help to finish her degree in social work. The fragile trust between them had strengthened gradually, weathering occasional storms of old resentments and misunderstandings. What saved me wasn't just determination, Maya continued. It was connection. Even when I was at my lowest, I held on to the memory of being part of something, a family. That memory gave me a North Star to navigate by, even when I lost my way. Thomas knew she wasn't just talking about their parents now, but about him too. The brother who had abandoned her, but whom she had never completely let go of. They had talked about it often during late-night conversations, painfully at first, then with increasing honesty and eventually forgiveness. The night that changed everything for me wasn't when I finally found justice for my father, Maya said, her eyes finding Thomas in the audience. It was when I stopped running from my past and faced it head-on. When I chose truth over anger, connection over isolation. The audience applauded as Maya concluded her talk. A line formed immediately of people wanting to speak with her, teenagers with wary eyes and guarded expressions, social workers taking notes, community organizers eager to involve her in their programs. Thomas waited patiently, checking his phone occasionally. Lang's trial had concluded 3 months earlier with a conviction on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The financial empire he'd built had collapsed as investigations uncovered decades of criminal activity. Some of his associates had turned state's evidence, including one who finally revealed the location of Robert Mitchell's remains, a remote construction site that had been paved over 20 years ago. They had held a proper funeral at last, Thomas and Maya standing side by side at the graveside while their father was laid to rest next to their mother. The closure had been painful but necessary, allowing them both to finally begin healing. Ready to go? Maya asked, approaching after the last well-wisher had departed. Thomas nodded. If you are. That was quite a speech. She shrugged, but he could see she was pleased. Just telling my story. Our story. They walked together to Thomas's car. He had stepped down as CEO of Mitchell Innovations 6 months ago, taking a role as Chief Technology Officer instead. The company was recovering slowly from the Lang scandal, rebuilding its reputation with an emphasis on ethical business practices. I heard from Caroline yesterday, Thomas said as they drove. She's in London now, working for a financial news service. Maya glanced at him. And how do you feel about that? Thomas considered the question. His brief engagement to Caroline seemed like a lifetime ago, belonging to a different version of himself. I wish her well, he said. Honestly, she wasn't involved in Lang's crimes. She was just another person he used. Like us, Maya observed. Like us, Thomas agreed. But we broke free. They arrived at the waterfront restaurant where they had reservations. It was an important night, the anniversary of Maya's appearance at Elysium, the night that had changed everything. They had decided to mark the occasion each year, not as a celebration exactly, but as an acknowledgement of their journey. As they were seated at a table overlooking the harbor, Thomas noticed Maya seemed nervous, fidgeting with her napkin. Everything okay? He asked. She took a deep breath. I have something to tell you. I've been offered a job. That's great, Thomas said immediately. Maya had been working part-time at a youth shelter while finishing her degree, but she'd been looking for something more permanent. It's with a national advocacy group for foster care reform, she continued. Developing programs, training social workers, lobbying for policy changes. It's everything I've wanted to do. Thomas reached across the table to squeeze her hand. I'm so proud of you. When do you start? That's the thing. Maya met his eyes directly. It's in Washington, D.C. I'd have to move. Thomas felt a momentary pang at the thought of his sister moving away just as they'd rebuilt their relationship. But he pushed it aside, recognizing it for what it was. The same selfish impulse that had allowed him to abandon her years ago. You have to take it, he said firmly. It's perfect for you. Relief washed over Maya's face. I was worried you'd be upset. After everything we've been through to find each other again. Hey, Thomas said gently. This isn't like before. This is you following your purpose, not running away. And Washington isn't that far. We have phones, email, flights every hour. You could visit, Maya suggested. I'll have a guest room. It won't be as fancy as your place, but I'd love to, Thomas said sincerely. They ordered dinner and talked about Maya's new job, about Thomas's plans to start a foundation supporting education for foster youth, about the ordinary details of their lives that now felt extraordinary simply because they could share them. As they finished dessert, Thomas raised his water glass. To Dad, he said quietly. He would be so proud of you. Maya raised her glass too. To Dad. And to us. To second chances. They clinked glasses, and Thomas felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The path that had brought them here had been painful, marked by loss and betrayal and hardship. But sitting across from his sister, no longer a stranger, not quite the little girl he remembered, but someone new and remarkable. Thomas knew they had found something precious amid the wreckage of their past. Later, as they walked along the harbor, Maya looped her arm through his. Do you ever think about that night? When I burst into your fancy dinner? Thomas chuckled. Only about once a day. I was so scared, she admitted. Not just of Lang and his people, but of seeing you. Of finding out you were nothing like the brother I remembered. And? Thomas asked, echoing the question she had asked him a year ago. Was I? Maya considered him in the soft glow of the harbor lights. Parts of you were buried pretty deep, she said honestly. But they were still there. Thomas nodded, acknowledging the truth of her assessment. Success and ambition had nearly smothered the person he'd once been. The boy who had promised to protect his little sister, who had shared his dessert with her at the orphanage, who had told her bedtime stories to keep the nightmares away. I'm glad you found me, he said simply. Me too, Maya replied. Even if your fancy restaurant did have terrible security. They both laughed, the sound carrying across the water. Around them, Boston continued its evening rhythms. Lights glowing in office buildings, cars passing on nearby streets, boats bobbing gently at their moorings. The city that had witnessed their family's destruction was now the backdrop for its partial restoration. As they turned to walk back to the car, Thomas realized something fundamental had changed. For years, he had been running. From his past, from his guilt, from the orphan boy he'd once been. Success had been his shield, wealth his armor against pain. But Maya's reappearance had stripped those defenses away, forcing him to confront the truth of who he was and what he had done. And in that confrontation, he had found not just reconciliation with his sister, but a kind of homecoming to himself. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "that night at Elysium, when you shouted for me to run." "Yes," Maya prompted when he paused. "I think I'd been running my whole life. Until that moment." Maya squeezed his arm gently. "Sometimes you have to stop running to find your way home." Thomas nodded, the simple truth of her words resonating deeply. They walked on in comfortable silence, two survivors who had found their way back to each other against impossible odds. The night air was cool against their faces, the future uncertain but no longer frightening. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as the abandoned children they had been, but as the family they had chosen to become once more.